Initiative. I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar on transition and WIOA and the impact on students with intellectual disabilities. Today I have Nancy Milfenter and Molly Beaver as our presenters, and also I'm joined by Pam Jensen from the Transition Improvement Grant. So with that being said, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Pam and Molly and Nancy.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. This is Nancy Milfenter.
Good morning, everyone. This is Pam Jensen from the Transition Improvement Grant.
And Molly Beaver, the Intellectual Disability Consultant for Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. I am going to start our presentation this morning talking about indicators for student success post-secondary experiences. And then after I'm finished talking about some of the things for students with intellectual disabilities in terms of their primary and secondary education, Nancy and Pam will come and they're going to finish the conversation for us. In between my presentation, my part of the presentation, and Nancy and Pam's part of the presentation, there will be a short break so that you guys can use the bathroom, get up and move around, those types of things. So with that, we will get started. I wonder. Sorry, hold on one second while we figure out how to advance the slides. I think that one might have to. Okay, there we go. We got it under control. So there is, of course, an alphabet soup of various terms in the world of special education. The acronyms and things that you see on the screen right now are some of the things you'll hear about today. IEP and PTP, CCR, also CCR, IEP, IDEA, UDL, WIOA, DVR, and ACP. So that can serve as a resource for you guys as we continue through this presentation. Okay, so this is what I mentioned at the start of our time together today. If we look at students with disabilities, there are two predictors of how successful students with intellectual disabilities will be after high school. One of them is their experience in the general education environment and extracurricular activities. Those are the things that I'm going to be talking about today. The other predictor is community work experiences, and that is what Nancy and Pam will be talking to you about today. So I'm going to focus on general education and extracurricular activities. When we talk about transition and how successful students will be after high school, this isn't a conversation that starts in high school. This is a conversation, this is what we need to do to set the students up for success all the way in elementary school. Participation in the general education environment and extracurricular activities. So I'm just going to talk more in depth about that today. So like I said, participation in general education is a predictor of better post-school outcomes, shown to increase student and parent expectations as well as employment, and expands opportunities. I'm sure by now you have all heard of Agenda 2017, so I will not spend too much time on it today. However, it is an important component to consider as we go through our information today. Our State Superintendent, Tony Evers, commissioned the Promoting Excellence for All, the State Superintendent's Task Force on Wisconsin's Achievement Gap to identify classroom-centered best practices that can address Wisconsin's achievement gaps. From here came the notion that for Wisconsin to be innovative in the 21st century and for communities to remain strong, all students must graduate college and career ready. It is important and necessary to stress that all means all. All students need to demonstrate knowledge, academic content, skills, and habits. These are things that students with disabilities need to be included in the pursuit of as well. I'm going to hijack a little bit of our time just to give you some other important information about students with intellectual disabilities. This year, students will be required to take a civics exam in order to graduate. Something that happened at the end of last school year, Act 212 was passed. IEP teams will now have to discuss whether or not the civics exam is appropriate for students with disabilities to take. Okay. Previously, under the original legislation, all students, including students with disabilities, had to take it. The IEP team could not decide for that student. They just had to. They didn't have to meet the 60 question benchmark in order to graduate, but they had to take the exam. Now, as of last, I think it was the end of March, mid-March, IEP teams do have the opportunity to discuss whether or not it's appropriate for the student to take. If the IEP team decides it is not appropriate, they will check a box on the I-7 district-wide assessment form. I have had a few questions on this topic about all students with IEPs. Is there any further guidance about who it's appropriate for and not appropriate for? In terms of the law, in terms of the act, there is no further guidance. It's important to remember that if the IEP team decides the student with a disability should take the exam, they still do not have to meet the 60 question benchmark. So it certainly doesn't hurt them to take the exam and partake in it because they do not have to meet the 60 question benchmark in order to graduate.
So question, Molly.
Sure.
So what types of questions are on the civics exam? And is there some place that parents could go and check it out?
Sure. So you can actually visit DPI's social studies webpage. The 100 questions have to be similar to the questions asked on the citizenship exam.
Okay.
And it's DPI has nothing to do with this. This is a district assessment, other than we're disseminating the information. But we don't have a sample assessment. It's all by district, and it varies wildly by district. Some districts, it is an exam. It is, it's just how you would anticipate an exam would look. Students take it by themselves at their desk. Others, it's a group project. They take it together. Other school districts, you can take it home and finish it. Before this act came through, I had encouraged teachers to do a question a day with their students with more significant disabilities, perhaps design a lesson around a question, and then you have kind of a social studies lesson every single day throughout the school year. It's really up to the districts how they're designing the actual test.
Okay.
But you can find more information on DPI's social studies website.
Great.
This is part 2 of me hijacking this to talk with you about some more important legislation. I would like to talk to you a little bit about ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, new rule on the 1%. So ESSA now limits the number of students who may take an alternate assessment to no more than 1% of the total number of all students in the state who are assessed in a given subject. So reading, language arts, mathematics, and science, in an assessment aligned with the alternate academic achievement standards. This is a change from ESEA as amended by the No Child Left Behind Act and current regulations. Previous regulations did not limit the percentage of students who may take an alternate assessment in a subject, but rather capped the percentage of proficient or advanced scores on the alternate assessment that could be counted towards federal accountability purposes. While these changes are specific at the state level, it requires the state to monitor district participants so as not to exceed the 1% cap. Okay, so that begs the question, who is a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities? It refers to a child with a disability or disabilities as defined under Section 602.3 of IDEA that significantly impact intellectual functioning and adaptive behavior, requires extensive, repeated, individualized instruction and supports, and is learning content in all academic areas based on alternate academic achievement standards. Okay. Something that's kind of cool for education nerds like me is that our own state superintendent, Tony Evers, was a part of the negotiated rulemaking for this. And so we were able to provide input as to how we would like this term, student with a significant cognitive disability, defined. Unfortunately, they could not reach a consensus. When you do negotiated rulemaking, it has to be it can't just be majority, it has to be voted unanimously, which in states, are so different, and so they weren't able to come to a specific language around this, and so it was up to the states to define, and we're in the process of doing that, but this is kind of where we're starting in terms of a definition for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. I touched on this a little bit. The previous regulations did not limit the percentage of students who may take an alternate assessment. It was the number of students who are proficient or advanced. And so if you had 2% of your population taking the assessment and you had 1.5% who were proficient and advanced, you could just, all those students could still take the assessment. It's just that only 1% could count towards your report cards or federal accountability as being proficient. So a little bit more about who should participate in this assessment. Really, truly, instruction and the standards should drive the conversation. When you're talking about, as an IEP team, who should be participating in this assessment, you should be thinking about what type of instruction does a student get and what alternate academic standards, the essential elements, then the student should participate in the alternate assessment or the dynamic learning math assessment. If your instruction is based on the universal standards, even if they're modified, even if the instruction is modified, adapted, differentiated, they should be participating in the general education assessment, the Forward, and the ACT. When an IEP team decides to use alternative standards, the IEP must align IEP goals with grade level alternate standards. Okay, I get this question a lot. If a student is in 8th grade and they're reading at a 3rd grade level, you do not use 3rd grade ELA standards. You use 8th grade ELA standards. It's very important for the student to advance in their learning. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. So what exactly does ESSA say? For each subject for which assessments are administered, the total number of students assessed in that subject using an alternate assessment aligned with alternate academic achievement standards may not exceed 1% of the total number of students in the state who are assessed in that subject. A letter went out to school districts in September, making them aware of this change. In December, a follow-up letter will go to each district, notifying them where they are within the, we have some districts who are 0%, they have no students taking the alternate assessment, and we have districts who are in excess of 3+%. So we will be notifying them of that in December. Some of you may have been thinking, but wait a minute, I have students that legitimately need to be taking this assessment, and it's going to put us over 1%. It's important to know that states cannot prohibit an LEA from assessing more than 1%. I previously taught in a district where there was about 100 kids in each grade. One student, in some cases, would put us over 1%. And that student may legitimately needed to be a part of the alternate assessment. We are not saying you need to go through and kind of see who makes the cut. We know that, and I believe that many districts are making appropriate determinations. However, based on the data and the numbers that I've looked, there are also districts that are making inappropriate decisions. And so our aim is to improve the decision-making process. As you are aware, being a part of the alternate assessment and alternate standards significantly alters their educational journey. And it has implications for their future. And so we want to make sure that we're having high expectations and giving every child the opportunities that are appropriate for them. ESSA also tells us that we have to require all LEAs, that's districts, to submit information justifying the need of an LEA to assess more than 1%. The form that you see on the screen is the form that districts have previously submitted for the proficient and advanced cap. It'll look similar, but with the language that ESSA requires. Even if you're appropriately identifying students to take the assessment, if you're over 1%, you have to fill out the form. I apologize for people for unnecessary paperwork, but that's don't shoot the messenger, I guess. ESSA also says that the states have to provide appropriate oversight. And I would do air quotes around appropriate oversight because we don't know what that is. Final regulations have not been released yet. We are suspecting that states will be required to define that for themselves. And we're meeting about that and talking about that and trying to figure out how that will look in Wisconsin, recognizing that a little over half of our districts are over 1%, and so that is a little over 200 districts, and that's a lot of oversight. And so we're trying to figure out a system that will be sustainable, considering that I am the system. So what can I reasonably do for districts? Further, ESSA does say that we have to make the information publicly available. It's important to note that we may not reveal personally identifiable information about individual students. In this case, some things will be redacted because, like I said, in some districts it's one student. And so that would be by identifying would make it easily identifiable as to which student that is in that district. I also would like to note that this isn't new. Disproportionality, schools who are disproportionately identifying students for special education of color, race, for special education, discipline, those types of things, they also have to do this. A little bit of public shaming, unfortunately. It's not as if it's going to be a giant list on the front page of our website, but we do have to make that information publicly available. What else does ESSA say? States that anticipate exceeding the cap will need to request a waiver from OSAP, that's the federal office, for 1 year only. This is also kind of new for us. They're kind of coming down hard on states who are over. And if we do submit a waiver for year one, we need to assure that the percentage will not significantly increase from the prior year. We also need to address any disproportionality in the number of percentage of students in any particular subgroup. We also have to submit this waiver 90 days prior to the opening of the testing window. This is significant because in past years it was done retroactively. We actually did assess this number of students. There actually was this number proficient and advanced. And so this will be kind of like foreshadowing. How many do you suspect will be taking this exam? And we have to submit it 90 days prior to the opening window, so states will have to submit it even sooner than that so that we can get our information into OSEP. So right now we're looking at about October, November of next school year, which seems early, but in order to meet deadlines, that will probably be the timeline. Okay, so why is this important to a parent group? Because districts are going to be having these conversations with IEP teams. They're going to be re-looking at whether or not the conversations were had at the beginning and having the right conversations around this. I'm not saying everybody does this, but there are conversations that go a little like, which exam would the student do the best on? The general assessment would be very stressful for the student. We should have them take the alternate assessment. And so districts may be coming back to IEP teams and talking about which assessment a student should be taking, even if they've already been involved in one or the other in previous years. So it's just important to know that as we move forward, parents may be calling and asking, wondering why now all of a sudden their student needs to be taking the general assessment when they had previously been taking the alternate. Last time we did this, the video did not work. And just in the interest of time, as I look through all the things I wanted to talk about, many of you have probably seen this video. It's of Megan Baumgard. She's a young woman with Down syndrome, and she talks, her message is about don't limit me. Don't limit her to be who you think a student with Down syndrome should be. There are many students now with Down syndrome who have received early intervention services from birth, and when they get to the school years and they do an IQ, they have IQs in the 90s. And so, you know, limits are what we decide for students sometimes, and she's just people to think outside of the box when you work with students. Don't make the student, she even says, don't make me the mascot of the class. So if you haven't seen it, I would encourage you to take a couple of minutes. It's pretty short. She's actually a part of the A&E TV series Born This Way. I had spoke before when this video first came out. I had called to see if she would be interested in speaking at our state ID conference. And originally her mom emailed me back. And then a couple months later, I got an email from her agent. So she is going places, and she has people now. And so certainly the sky's the limit for her. So if you are interested too, you could catch some of the episodes on the A&E. A little plug for her. She's doing wonderful things. Okay, I promised I would come back to the issue of making sure that your goals are grade level standards based. I get this question a lot, and some people don't like my answer. But in November of 2015, I was backed up by the U.S. Department of Education. So they are on our side on this. So what you see before you on the screen is an excerpt of that. So kind of the main idea of this is released, like I said, November 16th, 2015. You can find the whole thing on the U.S. Department of Education, or you can email me and I'll send it to you. And it outlines requirements of utilizing grade level academic standards when developing IEP present levels, goals, and specialized instruction to enable students to have access to, be involved in, and make progress in the general education curriculum, okay, or the alternate curriculum for that matter. And essentially what they have found is that when you hold students to higher levels of achieving, they oftentimes meet that level of achievement. And when you have high expectations, they reach those expectations. And even if they don't reach those expectations, they reach higher than they would have if you limited them to their third grade reading when they're actually in 8th grade. And there is research that supports that. If you are interested, Jennifer Kurth from the University of Kansas has research out. I think the actual study came out in 2010, but she's done lots of things since that show students with disabilities versus in the general education classroom versus students in resource pullout rooms, and the different level of expectations and goals provided to each group and the outcomes of such. And as you can imagine, because I wouldn't advertise it if it isn't, the students who were in the general education classroom had higher levels of expectations, achieved at greater levels. And I'm not talking about like a few points. I'm talking about like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times the students who were pulled out. Very encouraging results. Kind of gives us a little more weight when we're asking people to do this who are a little reluctant.
And you said that Jennifer Kurth is out of Kansas?
Yep, the University of Kansas. She actually came and spoke at the ID conference this year.
Okay.
Paula Kluth speaks very highly of her and her work. I would encourage you to look at some of the things she's doing. Some really cool things. Conversely, what you see on the screen is also an excerpt of that same Dear Colleague letter, and it says that low expectations lead to relatively low outcomes. They may meet that expectation, but it was a lower expectation to begin with, and so really kind of driving home the fact that we need to have high expectations and provide the opportunities to this group of students, all students, truly, but in this case, students with significant disabilities. This becomes even more important when we're talking about our state initiative right now, results-driven accountability. In the past, districts were evaluated solely on compliance factors. We have indicators in our state, all states do, and they're all compliance-based, all based on the law. How are states doing in areas of compliance, meeting the letter of the law? And what we have found over the past 10 years is compliance. We started out when we really started trying to improve compliance measures. I speak with my hands, so you can't see, but I'm making a graph with my hands. They started out probably in the mid-60s, 70s, depending on which indicator you were looking at. And then over the last decade or so, almost all of our compliance indicators are at 100%. Yay, great job, districts. And I'm not trying to undermine the achievement of that, because it's great that our districts are at that level of compliance. However, in that same time, student achievement has stayed relatively low and pretty stagnant across the bottom of that same graph. And so what it's telling us is that despite doing our best in measures of compliance, we're just not seeing, they really have no impact on the results of our students. So we are in the process of shifting to a more results-driven accountability for districts. So they won't just be measured on measures of compliance. They're going to be measured on how actually are students doing. Are we moving the needle for students with disabilities? So this is just an implementation timeline. It just kind of shows we're in the 2016-17 school year, so we're in year 3 actually, which is crazy. And so districts are piloting this system. They're not being measured fully on results. It's like 75% compliance, 25% results, and then next year will be the first year really of the whole process, and it'll eventually be a 50-50 split. So 50% compliance and 50% accountability in terms of how LEAs are evaluated, I guess. I did get a list of my, just so you don't kind of super freak out. Each consultant here works with about 20-ish districts throughout the state. I got letters of each one of my districts, and they forecasted how they would be doing under this new system. And I think only 2 of the 20 by the 50-50 year of results and compliance would need assistance. So districts are doing good things. It's not like we're tossing the cart of apples and everyone's going to be scrambling. Districts are doing good things, and I want to make sure that everyone knows that it's not like a gotcha thing. Districts are doing good things for students. So what is the department doing to help districts improve? These are our 4 improvement strategies, and there's a new slide out now that they just shared at our meeting on Monday, and all of them are like and ... because this is not a comprehensive list. It's just a sample of some of the things we're doing to assist districts with improving for RDA. Okay, I'm going to shift into, I've given you a lot of information about various things. I'm going to shift in a little bit about what can we be doing for our students now that I've told you that you all have to have grade level standard expectations for students. How can we help increase involvement in general education and overall grade level curriculum? You have probably heard of something called Universal Design for Learning at this point. Essentially, it provides more ways to access, more ways to participate, and more ways to demonstrate learning. Special education teachers are no stranger to this. It was probably not called Universal Design for Learning. It was just something you did to help your student with a disability be a part of the general education classroom. You would ask yourself, how do I get this student to access what everybody else is doing? How can I get this student to participate? And one thing I always struggled, the first 2 things as a teacher I loved to do with my students. The second part, especially for my students who are nonverbal, can be a little more difficult. I used to always mention to parents when I spoke with them about the results I had for them on their child's performance, I would say I wouldn't consider this a measure of their complete understanding of what they've learned. I think in some ways it was a measure of my own limitations of how to provide a way for that student to show me what they've learned, if that makes sense. So I always added that caveat because I didn't feel right saying, this is what your student knows, knowing that there's probably a way they could demonstrate it if I could just figure out how to tap into everything. So it was a work in progress, certainly. But yeah, that's essentially what Universal Design for Learning is. But it's not just meant for students with special education. It's meant for all students. It really shouldn't be a special education initiative. It should be happening in the general education classroom because all students benefit from this. It just so happens that I feel special education teachers are kind of an expert in it because it's what they've been doing, it's what they've been trained to do for students with disabilities. So one of the components of universal design for learning is multiple means of engagement. So many kinds of learning, particularly the learning of skills and strategies, require sustained attention and effort. When motivated to do so, many learners can regulate their attention and affect in order to sustain the effort and concentration that such learning will require. However, learners differ considerably in their ability to self-regulate in this way. Their differences reflect disparities in their initial motivation, their capacity and skills for self-regulation, their susceptibility to contextual inference, and so forth. A key instructional goal is to build the individual skills in self-regulation and self-determination that will equalize such learning opportunities. In the meantime, the external environment must provide options that can equalize accessibility by supporting learners who differ in initial motivation and self-regulation skills. And this is actually a handout, which the graphic on this slide, there'll be one on each, and it's actually one handout. I just cut out the parts I needed for each one. Engagement, I think of a book most of you have probably heard of, Just Give 'Em the Whale, by Paula Cluth and Patrick Schwartz. There's both a book for kids and then there's a teacher adults version that goes with it. You know, engagement comes in all different types and different ways. My own child, if you presented, wants nothing to do with reading. Imagine that, somebody who works for the Department of Public Instruction and can't get their own kid to read, but it wants nothing to do with reading. But if it is about dinosaurs, he will sit and he will listen and he will read. He's much more willing to participate in the activity if it involves dinosaurs and everything. And so his teacher has sent home every dinosaur book I think imaginable. She's used her scholastic rewards to buy dinosaur books to get him involved and engaged in the reading process. In multiple means of engagement. It doesn't mean you make a really engaging lesson that will catch, because it'll maybe catch like 80% of the kids, but even the most engaging lesson is still not going to be the right type of engagement for a subset of kids. And so it's providing multiple means of that activity, ways to engage in it. Some kids really prefer to do things on their own, you know, to not have to interact with other kids, to not have to be so loud and messy. They'd rather do a paper pencil thing. That's engaging for them. It doesn't seem engaging maybe perhaps to me, but it's what's engaging to that student. So it's really meeting students where they're at in terms of what's engaging to them. Multiple means of representation. As a special education teacher, I think you do this for your students all of the time. It comes naturally to special education teachers. I think tricky and challenging conversation with some general education teachers is about what's fair and what's equitable. I've had conversations with general education teachers who don't think it's fair for other kids to represent or to provide multiple means of representation for that student. But it doesn't matter if it's fair or not. It matters if it's equitable or not. You know, they're totally two different things. And some people, you've probably seen the slide of the 3 children trying to look over the fence, and they each have one box, and that's fair. But then one kid can hardly see; he's working really hard to see over the fence, and one kid can't see at all. And when they rearrange the boxes, all of the kids are able to see. Not everyone gets a box, but they don't all need boxes. And so I found it can be a difficult conversation to have with some people, but it's an important conversation to have because multiple means of representation is huge for students with disabilities, especially students with significant disabilities. And then there's multiple means of action and expression. Learners differ in ways that they can navigate a learning environment and express what they know, just like I talked to you about just a few minutes ago. Action and expression require a great deal of strategy, practice, and organization. There will not be one means of action and expression that will be optimal for all learners at all times in all contexts. So at this point, you might be wondering, if you're in a classroom with 20 students, how can you do this for all 20 students? I have a solution for you. I happen to be a big believer in co-teaching. It puts multiple professionals in a room to work together to achieve all of these things. It puts an expert, as I have said, a special education teacher or a speech and language pathologist or an occupational therapist who are experts at providing these UDL type strategies and behavior strategies, self-regulation strategies, and it puts them with the general education expert in areas of content knowledge, classroom management strategies, and it allows the two of them to work together to meet the needs of all students. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a district that allowed us to explore co-teaching, and we found it to be wildly successful for our students with and without disabilities. Our students with significant disabilities were able to participate fully in the curriculum and with their peers. Our students who were maybe considered to be at risk had more support and benefits of working with a teacher who specialized in differentiating and those types of things. And it benefited our students who were part of the gifted and talented program because oftentimes in classrooms they kind of get left to say like, oh good, somebody gets it, I can focus on these other kids that need support. But with co-teaching relationship, we were able to extend their learning and push them past perhaps what other classroom teachers may be able to do. So we found it wildly successful. At the beginning of this presentation, I said it wasn't just general education access, it was also extracurriculars. And so these are real examples from Wisconsin. There was a math teacher who was co-teaching and also happened to be the basketball coach. And so he brought in students from his classrooms with disabilities that he wouldn't otherwise have had if he wasn't co-teaching to be a part of his basketball program. Similarly, an English teacher who also happened to be the student council faculty advisor saw opportunities to have students with disabilities elected to the student council and be a part of the school in a way that they hadn't been before. Additionally, there was a cross-country and track coach who was actually this special education teacher, but was able to make connections with general education students that he wouldn't have otherwise, because special education teachers can sometimes be in their own room all day long working with students, which then provided opportunities to make friendships for his students with disabilities and increase the interaction with their peers. Let me just check my time. How am I doing? Okay. So co-teaching is something that you may have seen was an improvement strategy that DPI is working on under RDA. So there is to figure out what co-teaching could look like in Wisconsin. And this is significant because there is nothing right now. The group is starting from scratch. I can say that because I am a part of that group. And so we started at the bottom and trying to figure out what our values and principles are around co-teaching and using it, as a strategy for students. So we are currently using the implementation science framework, and there's a hyperlink to it there, but it's the National Education Research Network. It's something through there, and we're in the exploration phase. We have a really big meeting at the end of the month where we're going to meet for almost an entire day with many stakeholders to talk about what co-teaching could look like as a best practice. We've sought input from the field. We have completed a legal review, not surprising. It's not addressed much. And then we've also begun talking about how does co-teaching fit in the IEP. So far what we've got, students, so due to the combination of two distinctly different professionals, co-teaching accomplishes multiple objectives. Through research, we know that co-teaching reduces the stigma of being labeled for students with special needs, and emotionally, it increases the understanding and respect for all students in a heterogeneously based classroom. This is important because peers, students with disabilities and without disabilities, grow up to get jobs, to work alongside people with disabilities, to employ students with disabilities, and so that's an important piece. It also reduces the instructional fragmentation found when students are pulled out of the general education classroom to receive special education programming. I recently heard somebody say that it's not nice to pull kids out. We don't pull people anywhere, and so they didn't like that term at all. Talk about the special education teacher that doesn't feel comfortable with content in math class, but is perfectly comfortable teaching the content in a special education pull-out situation. So as a special education teacher, I can say that I did not get as much instruction in how to teach content areas as my general education counterparts when I was a pre-service teacher. Part of my co-teaching journey started because I had a group of second grade students who were sent to my room for me to teach them reading at the same time that their peers were being taught reading in the general education classroom. And I didn't have as much experience teaching reading. And these are the kids that needed it the most. And so we talked about me coming into the classroom and learning from the content specialist and supporting the students rather than being expected to have some sort of magic wand in that same time that I was going to magically provide something different, better, that was going to catch them up at the same time that it was being done in the general education classroom. Co-teaching is looked upon as one of the most innovative practices in education. Villa Thousand and Neven sees co-teaching as positive interdependence. It is the recognition that no one person can effectively respond to the diverse psychological and educational needs of the typical 21st century classroom. Like I said, we're using implementation science and the idea of inclusion, not just inclusion, but meaningful inclusion in a systematic approach. How can we make it sustainable? We're looking at co-teaching in 3 different areas: co-planning, the actual co-teaching, and then co-assessing. And so I have that outlined here for you here as a co-planning framework adapted, and you can see the resource there if you want to go to the original source. The ineffectiveness of co-teaching can sometimes stem from a school or district who have not had a systematic approach or understanding of inclusive practices. Inclusion and co-teaching do not mean the same thing. We often hear teachers say that our administration wants us to do inclusion, so we're co-teaching. Co-teaching is an inclusive practice, and it's only one of many inclusive strategies that a good system that supports inclusion may employ. Inclusion can only happen in a collaborative atmosphere, so there is some amount of readiness to do prior to just starting co-teaching. Often administration or teachers bring back something new to try in their classroom or district, but they change it to fit their needs. This affects the fidelity of implementation. This is my counter argument to people who say, I tried co-teaching and it didn't work. I will ask if you implemented it with fidelity the way co-teaching is meant to be done. And they're like, well, we didn't have co-planning time. Well, we didn't do. And when you start to remove those measures of fidelity, you start to affect the effectiveness of the program. you're implementing. So until we really implement it with fidelity, we can't say that it wasn't effective. When I was teaching, new things would be implemented, and then we were left to carry on. It was rarely revisited. It was a professional development day in October, and we never talked about it again. We're always chasing the new shiny thing in education. Implementation science really helps us think about how to implement a new program with fidelity, and that's why we're using that framework. Co-teaching can be a way to improve inclusiveness of a program as well as capitalize on each co-teaching partner's unique strengths. Adopt practices that reflect strong values with respect to both diversity and inclusiveness. Use multiple accessible instructional methods that are accessible to all learners. That's that UDL piece. Regularly assess student progress using multiple accessible methods and tools and adjust instruction accordingly. Know protocols for getting materials in alternate forms, rescheduling classroom locations, and arranging for other accommodations for students with disabilities. The teacher's approach in the classroom can truly make the difference in a student's ability to learn and succeed. Since every student learns differently, it doesn't make sense for a curriculum to teach toward a narrowly defined learner. This is where UDL acknowledges the need to reduce learning barriers and incorporate activities that benefit all students, including those with disabilities. And so before I switch to the next slide, which takes a break, which says take a break, so what I've talked to you today about are all ways to increase a student with a disability's access to general education, a higher set of rigor for standards and expectations, and inclusivity overall. And we know that doing those things from very early on, all the way to 4K, preschool all the way through high school, will increase a child's opportunity and likelihood of being successful after they leave high school. So with that, it's time to take a break.
So at this moment, I'm just going to check and see if there were any questions or comments in our chat. And it doesn't look like it. So I just want to say thank you to Molly Beaver for taking us through all of this really, really great information about students with intellectual disabilities and supporting those students in the regular ed classroom and in school in general. So I'm looking at the time right now, and I have about 10:26. So I think we're going to take about a 10-minute break at this point, and then we will resume with Nancy Mulfenter and Pam Jensen to talk a little bit more about transition and WIOA. So we'll be back at approximately 10:36. Thanks a lot, Educator Initiative, and we're back from break. So what we're going to next is Nancy Mulfenter and Pam Jensen, and they're going to talk about the WIA and transition. So, and one other special note, we're going to hold off on all questions and comments until the end, okay? So just if you do have any questions or comments, just put them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So, Nancy and Pam.
Hi, everyone. This is Nancy Mulfenter, and I am the statewide transition consultant with the Department of Public Instruction.
And Pam Jensen, and I'm the project coordinator for the Transition Improvement Grant.
And as we speak today about transition services for students with disabilities and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we will do our very best to leave enough time at the end for questions. As Sherry said, we'd like to be able to provide you with all the information, and then we're always happy to take questions because I know there are many individual situations for transition students out there at schools and in communities, and we want to be able to help and answer questions appropriately. But the more information that you have to ask questions, I think that'll be helpful for you as well. So I'm going to start with some food for thought for us. It's only a couple of minutes long. But and then as you watch this, I would love if you would just think about what does this have to do with transition and employment in the future. And I'm hoping that we can watch it. Here it comes. Just a little slow, but it's coming. I think it's coming. It didn't come through. So, I watched it last night through this link, but it seems to be giving us trouble at the moment.
Could we copy the link and paste it?
Maybe. Let's see, I'm worried that if I try to get to it another way that I'll disconnect us. Oops, in fact, I think I just did. So, let's see. Do you want to try to get
Still
back?
on.
Oh,
I think we're.
Michigan High School's football team takes sportsmanship to
there it is.
a whole new level.
Perfect.
The kids went behind their coach's back to make a dream come true for their disabled teammates. Steve Hartman has more on this ultimate act of kindness.
Between classes, they schemed and conspired. For weeks, the football players here at Olivet Middle School in Olivet, Michigan, secretly planned their remarkable plan. Did anybody go, this is a crazy idea?
No, everyone was in on it. Well, like the coaches didn't know anything about it. They're like, going behind their back.
I've just never heard of a team coming up with a plan to not score.
It's just like to make someone's day, make someone's week, make them happy.
The play, which was two plays actually, happened at a home game earlier this month. The first part of their plan was to try to get as close to the goal line as possible without scoring, even if it meant taking a dive on the 1 yard line, which it did. The crowd was not happy. Quarterback Parker Smith.
But us kids knew, hey, we got this. This is our time. This is Keith's time.
Keith Orr is the little kid in the brown jacket. He's learning disabled, struggles with boundaries, but in the sweetest possible. Because of his special nature, it's no surprise that Keith embraces his fellow football players. What is surprising is how they have embraced him.
Well, we thought it'd be cool to do something for him because we really wanted to prove that he was part of our team and he meant a lot to us. Nothing can really explain getting a touchdown when you've never had one before.
Which brings us to part 2 of this play. You didn't see Keith because they were so protective of him. He was in the middle of that rush.
And when you crossed the goal line, what was that like? Awesome. It was like, did he just score a touchdown? Did you get him around? Like, oh,
Keith's parents, Carrie and Jim, almost missed the moment. They got the certificates.
somebody's always going to have his back from now till the day he graduates.
She's right. pretty much everyone follows suit. Today, Keith is a new kid, although by no means was he the only one who was profoundly changed.
What was it like for you? It was like once I saw him going, I was smiling like about like here.
Wide receiver Justice Miller.
Like nothing could wipe that smile off my face.
Why did it affect you so much?
Because like he's never been like cool or popular, and he went from being like pretty much a nobody to making everyone stay.
Justice admits the play wasn't his idea.
I would have not really thought about that.
He says it never crossed his mind to give Keith any glory.
Well, I kind of went from being somebody like mostly cared about myself and my friends to caring about everyone and trying to make everyone stay in everyone's life.
Which may just make that touchdown the most successful football play of all time. Steve Hartman on the road in Olivet, Michigan.
Okay, so we wanted to show you that to connect to some of the information that Molly presented, and as a way to think about how adults can also support transition and inclusion first, and then transition, and the fact that there are strong connections between the two. That developing skills and habits also means developing confidence and having relationships and friendships that can support you in the future. So, and I love to watch that video no matter how many times I watch it, because I think it's really powerful to think about the fact that our students without disabilities in our schools and communities do want to include our students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and sometimes as adults we worry about that too much, I think, and don't support the facilitation of that. And when I use that video, sometimes I like to mention we have to remember that somebody, at least one adult at that school, had to support that, and probably multiple adults had to allow that student to be on the football team. And I think we've all seen and heard of situations where adults are so worried that something's not going to go right or not allowing it to happen, and then in that case prevents the relationships from forming and those special moments from happening. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about transition planning and the PTP, or post-secondary transition plan, and how those are related to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and what we think everybody needs to know, teachers, parents, administrators, agencies, DVR, everyone involved, all stakeholders.
So the first thing that we'll start with is a post-secondary transition plan, or you may have heard it called the PTP. One thing we want you to remember is that the PTP is a part of the IEP. Sometimes it gets sent differently, it doesn't get included with the IEP, so we want to make sure that you know it is a part of the IEP and must be done once the student is 14. So if a student is 13 during the time frame of their IEP, then they should have the PTP done. Otherwise, once they turn 14 during that school year, a meeting would have to be held to complete the PTP. The goals of the PTP are in education and training, education and training, employment, and independent living when appropriate. So the independent living goals are based on if the IEP team feels the student is in need of independent living skills.
And I would just add to that, as a parent of teenagers myself, I would really like for my kids to have independent living goals, and so teachers and family members can certainly raise that as an issue at the IEP meeting, even if there isn't a plan for the student to leave home right after high school and live on their own. I think that we would certainly say that having an independent living goal for every student, every youth, is a best practice. So, and you can always ask to talk about that at an IEP and transition planning meeting if it's not raised as a potential area for a goal during the meeting.
Okay. Setting up and discussing how to determine those post-secondary measurable goals are done by using an age-appropriate transition assessment. So every year, every student has to at least have one age-appropriate transition assessment. We would tell you that there are generally several age-appropriate transition assessments done throughout a year, but many times they're not recorded on an IEP. So just make sure when you're in IEP meetings or throughout the year that you're talking about age-appropriate transition assessments, what kind of assessments have been done. They can be informal or formal. Formal assessments are generally paper pencil type testing, and informal assessments might be job shadows, on the job trainings, just observations in the school and around peers. There's all sorts of things that can be discussed or talked about as an age-appropriate assessment. It may even be just talking with the student to find out what their life goals are and the things that they want to do after school. The course of study is also important. You want to look at the courses that your son or daughter are taking to make sure that they match with those measurable post-secondary goals as well. Transition services we'll talk about a little bit later, but those are the services or activities that are happening while a student is in school to meet their measurable post-secondary goals. We've changed the transition services to meet the WIOA regulations, so that's why we're going to leave that one for a little bit later. But they're also important things and activities that students have to be doing in school to prepare them to be, say their goal is to be a welder or to work in food service. Those activities are things like job shadows, on-the-job trainings, the courses they're taking. There's a variety of different things that we want to consider the student is doing on a job, in the home, in the community. So again, we'll get to that again a little bit later. And of course, annual goals. So the annual goals to meet the measurable post-secondary goals as well.
So this is a visual. I just made the visual a little bit bigger on this slide of the things that Pam just described to you, just as a reminder for teams. And feel free to print this out and take it with you, that the life goals of the student should really always be at the center of the other requirements that are laid out in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act are to make sure that various pieces of the person's life and skills and interests are being considered through that assessment process, and courses that the student wants to take and services that the student needs to have in order to help reach those life goals, and then annual goals that serve as the benchmarks to reaching the post-school goals. But the life goals really need to be at the center of the discussion, and the life goal should be individualized for the particular student and individual. And we know that, we recognize that transition assessment, meaningful transition assessment, can be challenging at times for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because they may come in the form of paper and pencil questions and survey questions and computer-based questions. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is going to be discovery, the discovery process, and specific to employment. What might that look like, and what can it entail, and who's involved? And so we're going to get to that. And before we do that, we want to fill you in on the requirements under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, because they really bring us to a new place in terms of what schools and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation need to be providing to students to support the attainment of career goals. So the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and if you haven't already, you will start hearing WIOA. There are also people, professionals, and community members who call it WIOA. We have been asked not to call it WIOA. We have been asked to either say it fully, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or say WIOA, because in a native language, WIOA is a word that we don't want to be using, and so we like information every opportunity we get. So when Pam and I say WIOA, that's the reason why we do that. It is new federal legislation, so it is not coming from the Department of Public Instruction or the Wisconsin Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. It's a federal law. It's part of the Rehabilitation Act, and it replaces the section of the Rehabilitation Act that was formerly called the Workforce Investment Act. Not that you need to know all that specific information, but in case you wanted to look it up and look up the changes, you have that information. But the main point is just that this is federal law that DPI has to follow, DVR has to follow, and schools have to follow. So I wanted to share this with you because this is the look on the faces of many school administrators over the past year or so as I have begun presenting about WIOA, because it does bring about some significant changes in what schools what's possible for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but some specific components also impact what schools can and cannot pay for transition services, and so that's one of the impacts that it has, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about.
So one of the shifts with WIOA is increased responsibility to collaborate with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And why do we need to do this? There's no one under the age of 24 can go to work for a sub-minimum wage without first exploring community employment through DVR services. So what this means for schools is that they are no longer able to pay for sub-minimum wage employment.
So for youth and their families, this is, as of July 22nd of this year, the new piece of this is that prior to that date, if an individual and their family and their IEP team felt that going into sub-minimum wage employment was going to be appropriate, then there was no need to make contact with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. That a person could make that choice for their life and graduate from high school and take a job making sub-minimum wage. Now, this new law tells us that that cannot happen. And so it's really important for students and their family members, as well as for teachers, to understand that DVR really needs to be a part of the team if the individual is planning to consider sub-minimum wage at any point before they turn 25 years old. Because this new law and any sub-minimum wage employers will have to say that they can't employ the person if they're under 25 and have not worked with DVR first. So that's one of the key points of this shift for schools is it increases the responsibility to collaborate and make sure that DVR counselors are at the table so that students and family members can make an informed choice about working with DVR or not.
So shift 2 is reframing the provision of transition services to match the pre-employment transition services outlined in WIOA. And why are we doing that? WIOA tells us schools are responsible for providing pre-EATs in conjunction with DVR. So that's when we're talking about the transition services that school districts provide to the student. We've taken those transition services and matched them with the WIOA pre-employment transition services. You may hear people call pre-EATs PETs as well. We've also been asked to call it pre-EATs versus PETs. And again, that's the pre-employment transition services.
So DVR, our vocational division of rehabilitation here in Wisconsin, decided that it's a federal movement too, that students were expressing that they were confused about the word PETs. And so just like with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, we're trying to say the full terminology, pre-employment transition services, whenever possible. But we know in education it's really hard to avoid acronyms because it's our way of life. And so we've gone down to pre-EAT in a lot of things, as has DVR. We're trying really hard with all of the workforce innovation and opportunity information and presentations to collaborate closely as state agencies with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation so that we're using the same words and saying the same things, because we know that can be confusing for people too, for teachers and families and students. So we're trying to align, and as Pam said, has really given us this clear directive that on the education side, so DPI, along with school districts, is responsible for capturing information and maintaining information. It's data. We are asked to collect this data and maintain it about what transition services students are receiving that match these categories. And these are the categories. So the first one that WIOA lists is job exploration counseling. So helping students and their families understand the variety of jobs that are out in the community and what you need to do to obtain those jobs. So what education and training do you need, and what do you need to do to prepare for different types of jobs? What will those jobs entail? How much will they pay? And what kind, where do you need to go to college or job training to get to them? So all of that is encompassed in job exploration. One of the ways that schools are going to be supporting this starting next year as another requirement through DPI is through academic career planning, or ACP, and that will fit very nicely into this pre-employment transition service category. All students in 6th grade and above starting next year will have to have an academic career plan, and that's actually state law. That state law also says that parents and family members have to be informed about what's in the academic career plan more than one time per year. And so that's something else to keep in mind for the future. That requirement hasn't started yet, but it does start at the beginning of next school year. So bear that in mind for next year. But that will fit into that category. The next one is work-based learning, which includes things like working at the school store, helping deliver mail for the office, working in the school library, but also going out into the community and doing work-based learning experiences. Students going out to volunteer at the library in town, or at the YMCA, or at the local animal shelter. Those are also work-based learning experiences. Then schools can also support paid work experiences on their own or in conjunction with DVR to actually have a student work at a business temporarily or as a high school job, and those are work-based learning experiences. The third one is post-secondary education or higher education program counseling. So as a student, as a school and school staff help a student with number 1, job exploration counseling, number 3 should also be present. So the school staff, the school counselor, case manager, other teachers, and it could really be a teacher of any subject if it's related to the job that the student is interested in, should be helping the student and family understand what kind of training and education am I going to need to get there. The number 4 is WIOA refers to number 4 as work readiness and also includes the terminology of social and independent living skills. And so these are another word for this that we use often in transition, in the transition world, is soft skills. So for work, especially, knowing that it's important to be able to get up and get to a job on time, knowing that certain jobs have requirements for what you wear, knowing that sometimes you have to have a uniform, you have to be able to interact with your coworkers, you have to be able to follow instructions from your supervisor. Those are all work readiness and soft skills for work. And in our PTP, or post-secondary transition plan, as we revised our transition service options to match this list, we divided it into home and community. Because we also know that an important part of transition services for students during school, there's that third goal that we mentioned earlier is recommended, to have a goal for independent living. And that's where home skills come into play. And we know that at schools, teachers and other personnel talk with students about cooking safety and doing your laundry and being able to manage a home and a budget. And so all of those pieces would fall into the work readiness and social and independent living skills for home. And then the last one, self-advocacy instruction, we know is critical for all youth, and particularly youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so schools typically have a variety of ways that they support this. Some have actual self-advocacy curriculum. Some do it by means of having a weekly meeting with the student and asking, how do you think things are going? What do you think will help you? We also advise here a best practice, particularly for students who are 14 and older and in transition services, to support the student to understand their own disability and how it impacts their needs for assistance and help, because they think about going on beyond high school when the IEP is no longer going to be in place, whether they're at college or a job or both. Then they need to know what their own needs are so that they can articulate those to other people. One more thing that we're doing through the transition improvement for supporting self-advocacy instruction by schools is that we are creating an app that students can use to participate in their own transition planning. And we also envision that some students are going to need help with that app, and that it will be another opportunity for families to participate in providing information into the transition planning process as well. That this will be something that students and family members will be able to access basically from any device where the internet is available. So, or any device that you can use an app on, this app will also fit. So it will be called the Wisconsin Transition App. So, and it's actually WI for short, WI Transition. And as soon as that launches, we're getting closer every day. As soon as that launches, we're going to advertise as widely and broadly as we possibly can.
And so if you're on a listserv for this webinar, then we'll make sure that Jerry gets this as well and that she can send it out to you. Another thing I want to mention with the pre-ets, remember that's the same as the transition services in the PTP. You should have received a handout also that has transition services with it. And that is a list of all the transition services that you would have to choose from when creating a PTP. So it would be a great idea to look over that list, think about things that your child can do at home and at school that's going to make them more independent, build self-advocacy skills, and prepare them for the future, and bring that with you to an IEP meeting. Circle the things that you see as appropriate, things you can do at home, and that will make that discussion much richer and easier to follow through with also.
What if there were activities or things that parents thought of that weren't on that list? Can those still be added to the list of services? I mean, it's a pretty
Exhaustive,
I guess, list,
right.
but I
Yes.
just think some people may have other things or other thoughts in mind depending upon the needs of their particular student.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, that's a good question. So I think everyone probably heard Sherry's question about if you think of something, if a parent or student or even a teacher thinks of something that they don't find on the list, both the app and the PTP or post-secondary transition plan offer an opportunity to add individualized information. We would, and while it is a lengthy list, and we know that sometimes it's challenging to, depending on the amount of time you have at the moment, to read through it all, we recommend that you try to look through the entire list and then add additional information, but just to see if what you're thinking fits somewhere. And then you can always add, like with other portions of the post-secondary transition plan, other than the transition service section, you can always select from a drop-down menu and then add information in a text box. Mm-hmm. And so that would be, our recommendation would be to do that whenever possible, just because we are all responsible, and your schools are responsible for capturing these pre-employment transition services. And we have to actually work with DVR, and we're going to have to all submit that data to the federal government. And so it just creates another level of having to look at data on your school's part. Yeah. If, but it's absolutely, students should have what they need for services. So that's the important part. And so, and we know that the list is lengthy, but we tried very hard to capture everything that we could possibly think of without making it untenable to look through and read through. So then this third shift is the one, think back from a few minutes ago, my picture of the chicken with very wide eyes about having come out of the shell. And this is the shift that causes school administrators and teachers and family members and students at times too to have those wide eyes. And this shift is that schools have an extra level of responsibility now for not only working with DVR to do this, but to do this within the school services themselves to create opportunities for job exploration in the community, for integrated, competitive jobs for students regardless of disability. And the primary portion of the law that speaks to this is the portion that says that school districts, so on the slide, we have LEAs, that stands for Local Education Authorities, and that's a school district. School districts can no longer pay for transition services at an outside agency, so they can't have a contract with a community agency if that contract involves any kind of training for students to complete sub-minimum wage work. So on the next slide, so I'm just gonna, the reason, I'll share what the next slide is that the reason that WIOA was written in this way is because if a student has one paid work experience while they're in high school, and this is students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, if they have one paid work experience before they leave high school, they're twice as likely to work in adulthood in a competitive integrated job. And if a student has two paid work experiences, they're 5 times more likely to work in a competitive integrated job after high school. So WIOA was written based on many years of experience. And then one of the handouts that we've provided to you explains that there are multiple questions that we've gotten from districts and some from agencies and some from family members about these contracts that school districts sometimes have for transition services. And so some of the questions are, if the student, if the employer, if the sub-minimum wage employer or sheltered workshop is willing to pay the student minimum wage to be there and do the work, can the school have the contract? And the answer is no. Because WIOA is very clear that schools cannot pay for any transition services from an outside agency that involve having the student involved in work that's paid at a sub-minimum wage rate to anyone in the building. And so another question that I've gotten is, if the student wants to go and be at that sheltered workshop and learn the work and volunteer, can they do that? And the school cannot pay for it. The school cannot engage in that contract to have the student do that. If the student wants to do it on their own time and private pay, then that's between the individual and the family and the workshop. But the school can't pay for it. And then the last question that I've gotten is, if the student, works fast enough. So for those of you familiar with the way the sub-minimum wage works, is that it's piece rate. So you get paid for every bolt that you screw on or every piece of paper that you fold and put in an envelope. And if the student works fast enough at that sub-minimum wage piece rate job that they actually earn minimum wage, can they do that? And the school cannot pay for that. So if the student is sitting side by side with other people, or there are other people in that building doing the same work for sub-minimum wage, for piece rate, the school cannot have that as part of the contract. It's important to note, though, that schools can still have a contract with those community support providers, vocational providers, vendors. They have a variety of names. Schools can have a contract, but it has to be for experiences that lead to competitive integrated work. It can't be any kind of training on work that's not paid at minimum wage and that's not in an integrated setting.
So one of the handouts you also have is 7 ways for students to gain work experiences. This is just a guide for you as well to be able to think about ways that your son or daughter could get out into the community and have work experiences, or if educators are looking for ideas and thoughts about what are our best avenues or ways to do that. And in that handout, the 7 areas that we discuss are business tours, informational interviews, job shadows, so going out in the community, job shadowing someone that is doing a job that maybe your son or daughter would like to try, completing volunteer work. So as Nancy said, in a sheltered setting, the school district would not be able to pay for volunteer work. So our main goal is to get the student out into the community and having those experiences. So volunteering at a local library would be a great opportunity for a student to have. Getting involved in internships. There are many project search opportunities that are coming around the state, which provide students an opportunity to have an internship within a business and rotate different jobs throughout the school year. The main reason for the main criteria for project search is that a student has already met their graduation requirements, and then this gives them the opportunity to really focus on community employment.
And Pam and I had an opportunity yesterday to attend the statewide project search meeting, and we got information that last year, so interns who were with project search during the last hired, not all by the same business where they interned, but they had 88% of students who were involved with project search last year as interns now have a competitive integrated job in the community. So pretty great numbers.
Yes. So if you are looking for more information on project search, we can help you with that, or we can put you in the direction of someone that can share more information if it's offered in your area. Number 6 is paid temporary work experiences. This is a great way for students to get experiences. Maybe if an employer isn't quite ready to hire someone, through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation or sometimes the school districts will fund to pay wages for a student while they're receiving that work experience. And then, of course, the last one is jobs. So just considering and thinking about every teenager working generally has a job that's after school or on the weekends. So we certainly would want to promote that as well as opportunities they may have through school or during the school hours.
So how can schools, family members, friends support all of these kinds of services that Pam and I have just talked about? Well, one of them is, I think a really critical one, is rethinking assessment. That schools and teachers, and in conjunction with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, need to recognize that lots of youth with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities have to have a variety of experiences before they figure out what they're good at and what they want to do. We ask students a lot, what do you like, what do you want to do, what are your strengths and interests? And from school settings, we have a part of that information, but school settings and work settings are quite different. And so we need to help people get out into their communities, and we're going to talk about the discovery process in just a little while. We also have this academic career planning piece that is in place in some districts now and will be in all districts as of next year, that will have a variety of components. You may very well hear about Career Cruising, which is an online portal that many students will be using in our state, and students with intellectual and developmental disabilities can certainly do that as well, and hopefully with the support that they need to be successful at it and learn from it. But I also think that for all of us on IEP teams and teachers, school staff, family members, thinking about these other pieces that are on the slide not just of helping people figure out what their interests and strengths are from a variety of settings and trying a variety of tasks, but also motivators. I think when we really stop and think about ourselves and what motivates us to want to be at work and to want to do our job well, for me personally, I love getting to see people like Sherry and Pam and spend some time with them. I like my friends at work. I love getting to talk about the fact that every student, regardless of disability, can work and have a high quality life throughout their adulthood and have friends and have full lives. So I love those parts of it. And so those are the things that motivate me on days when I have to wait in a line that's 5 deep for the copier at DPI. And so we all have, and it's so all these experiences that we can help students help them understand that there are pros and cons to school, pros and cons to work, pros and cons to living with a roommate, pros and cons to living with your parents. But we're all motivated by certain things, and we can't forget about those as we support our students and youth through this process of transition. We have to help celebrate successes with students and acknowledge that everybody has successes and failures, and we learn from our failures as much or more than we do from our successes. And then we have to help people learn to determine what really brings them personal satisfaction, which is closely related to motivators. And then on the school side, I'm sure that many of you, I'm hoping, have seen our Agenda 2017 poster talking about the fact that schools obviously support students to gain knowledge, but also schools need to help support students to gain skills and habits for successful academic life and successful work life and home life and community life after they leave school. So, if you haven't seen this video, we're going to cross our fingers and hope it comes up faster than the last one. But this is a great video that demonstrates some of that through the school setting. All right, the page came up pretty fast, but we're still waiting for the loading of the videos. Since the last one took a moment, I'm not too nervous yet. Because it is, we can tell that it's loading. We're going to try one more time.
seeing to put all of the skills together across the street, which is one of the biggest accomplishments.
This took lots and lots of practice. He was born blind. In kindergarten is when he was diagnosed with the hearing loss. I've just been really happy with the support from all of the team members, the support from the school district. I've always thought big, and the team has been really good about the details of getting there.
We have someone who works with him with his speech and language. There's a microphone the teacher puts on them that amplifies the sound. We have a spectrum of students in public education. As a public, that's what we should be funding, is helping those kids reach their potential just like we are with every other student.
I was first hired 10 years ago, really to watch over him until the responsibilities got more and more and more. Isaiah needed more help, and I actually did not know anything about Braille when I first started. And as time went on, I became his Brailleist. And so I took the stuff home during the summer and learned how to Braille. We meet with the teachers. They give us a print copy of what the assignment is. I will go in and Braille it for him. We've gotten very close to the family. My husband's a pilot. He takes
We apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm going to try one more time to see if I can get you back to that place to see the end, because obviously the end is always the best part of any video. And while it seems a little bit crazy to keep trying, my experience with videos is that the more times you load them, the quicker they load. So videos are so worthwhile, but the technical difficulties are common.
of what the assignment is. I will go in and Braille it for him. We've gotten very close to the family. My husband's a pilot. It takes some time. He actually can. My husband lets him fly.
All these times before, I believed that I couldn't do things like that, but I'm knowing now that I can. I'm planning to get a job playing the organ and get a job at McDonald's.
I can see him owning the restaurant, that he could build the skills. He's actually an organist and travels around the state of Wisconsin playing at a number of churches.
I love to rock out on the organ and getting paid for it also. I want to get even better in
He will be a part of a 6-week program at Janesville this summer, the employability program down there.
It's going to teach me all the stuff I need to know for when I live on my own and when I'm in the work service.
I just admire him a lot because he's gone through so much. His challenges are huge, and he's just overcome so many of them.
I feel good about where I am. I'm proud of it.
All right, so technical difficulties aside, for me, just to be able to hear Isaiah say, I didn't think I could do it, and now I know I can, and he's proud of himself, makes it all worth it every time I see that. So for this video, and we'll talk a little bit about this, and then I will try it, but I won't make you wait so long again. This is a longer video, so if we can show it, I will. If not, I would encourage you to watch it on your own. You'll have a copy of the PowerPoint accessible to you, I believe. Sherry's nodding her head yes. But this video is a great demonstration of the discovery process and experiential assessment. So it will talk about, and this is from Wisconsin, from a community in Wisconsin, up in Kewaunee County, and that one of the things that we want you to think about here is how an experiential discovery process or an experiential assessment like discovery really serves as the foundation of job development for students and really helps them decide, what do I think I want to do and what am I good at, but helps them connect with employers. So it goes really hand in hand with the 7 ways for students to gain work experience that Pam described to you earlier. And so this, what I like about this video, if we can get it loaded and playing, is that it brings families as partners and teachers and DVR all together working for students in Kewaunee County at Kewaunee High School, Luxembourg Casco High School, and also Algoma High School.
When we talk about job development, if you haven't heard of that term before, it's just the process in looking at the strengths, interests, and preferences that your son or daughter has and matching a job to those strengths, interests, and preferences based on their skills, their needs, and anything that they want to share about a job that they would like to have. So it's a person going out and actually looking for those jobs on behalf of your son or daughter.
This is encouraging. It's coming. So while we're waiting for this, I can share with you that one of the things that we recommend as a best practice for, I know that you have the families as partners. It's a 1-page document that actually Judith Quigley, who is the statewide project search director, but also a parent of a young woman with a disability who was in the project search program, she helped to write that and give some concrete ideas, like the ones that Pam mentioned earlier about how families can jot down information and keep some information ready for IEP meetings and other meetings to talk about, to help inspire the student to talk about, related to where they like to go, what they like to do. There are a number of examples that I have in my own life of students that I've worked with that their first or second or multiple work experiences were at places where the school didn't connect them, but they were actually already connected through things that they do on weekends and with their family and with friends, that then if the employer, maybe it's a restaurant manager or maybe it's someone at a local bookstore, knows them from their patronizing that business, then that's a great place to start for thinking about where work experiences can happen. So that's one of the ways that family involvement can be really, really critical in success. All right, we're going to try this. and hope that it plays smoothly. I'm not sure it's quite done loading yet, so. I'm going to give it just another minute to load because I think it's still working. You can see it, but it's not playing.
Oh.
So we can see it, but it's not.
Looking like it was in slow motion.
Yeah, but now it's just not playing. I suspect it's just still loading. It's a little bit longer, so it might. Take it back for just a second. See if that helps. All right, I don't want to make you wait any longer. The only other option, I just don't know. Oh, there it is. That's all I have to do is just say that, and then all I have to do is say that, and then suddenly it plays. So I think unfortunately it may just be too hard to watch this.
The kids really need to get out in the community so other people can see what people with disabilities have to offer. It gets them.
I think we're going to continue to have stops all the way through. So if we can get through about the first minute, then we'll go ahead and stop it.
You know, how they're socially, and really helps them engage with other people and figure out what they're really good at.
They feel like they're needed somewhere and people are waiting for them to come to work. And this is a way that they can do something for themselves and be successful at it, get a paycheck.
Poor Wendy. I won't tell her that she was frozen on our screen like that.
One of the things that we need to do to get kids that are trans.
All right. So I apologize that this didn't work the way that we had hoped. But again, that video I do highly recommend. There are a variety of perspectives that are demonstrated there. And rather than trying to play any more videos, I'm just going to tell you what each of them kind of describes, and then I think I always enjoy watching every single one of these videos. Alexis is a young woman from West Allis who, when I met her, she said that she wanted to be a child care worker, and so her school supported her to get a work experience at a daycare. And after a few weeks, when we came back together and asked Alexis, how's it going? She said, well, not so good. So we said, why? And she said, well, I figured something out. I really don't like kids. And so this video is about how her school and DVR worked together with an agency, an employment support agency, to get her a job at Best Buy. And she likes that so much better, and is doing really well at that job. So that's about, and I think it's a great video too. And then our last two videos that I would really love to be able to show you, but I just don't want us all to sit here waiting for them to load. The first one is a young man from Stoughton who wound up with a job at a jewelry store making jewelry fully supported by his school. So what I mean by that is that he didn't need to work with DVR, and so I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know before you have a chance to watch the video that while Pam and I talked earlier about the fact that students and youth under the age of 25 with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act can no longer go directly from school into a sub-minimum wage employment situation, that doesn't mean that they can't get a job in the community without working with DVR. And so Cullen from Stoughton is a really good example of someone whose school supported him to go through kind of a discovery process and get in-school work-based learning experiences and figure out that he's really very talented at making jewelry, and now he works for a jewelry store in town. So that video describes that. And then the second video is about a young man in Holman whose school and DVR worked together to find him a job, and his dad is in that video talking about how much it's meant to James to have that job at American Family. And then what we've given you here is two website resources. One of them is our Wisconsin Transition Improvement Grant website, so I'll let Pam tell you a little bit about what's on that one.
Okay, so if you go to the www.witig.org website, you'll find more information on just transition services in general. We have a resources area where you can type in resources. We have information about what TIG is doing, and TIG is short for Transition Improvement Grant. And there's information on there about families and transition. There's a youth section. And also there's information about each of the coordinators around the state. So we have coordinators that work in the different CSER regions and in different regions throughout the state. So we're always available also to answer any transition-related questions that you may have.
And then the Let's Get to Work website is referenced. You probably noticed it on a couple of the videos, and these two videos on this screen about Cullen and James are from that website. Lots of great resources. Also, some of the documents that were shared with you with this webinar, such as the Families as Partners, the 7 Ways to Gain Work Experience, why high school inclusion matters. Those are all on the Let's Get to Work website as well. Everything on both websites is free.
One other thing I would mention about our website, or the TIG website, is that there's that will bring you to the DPI page that if you would like to, you can go onto that page and do a PTP demo, and that will walk you through what exactly is in the PTP.
So then the last thing that we wanted to mention is that we recognize, and hopefully everyone on all IEP teams will recognize, that life isn't just about work, that there are academics that are important for students, and also things outside of school and work that are important, that people have lives as well, and that seamless transition is really about balancing all of the things that we know students want to have in their lives after. The last thing that we like to see when we survey students after they've left high school is that they feel like their lives aren't full, that they don't have much to do. And maybe if they work part-time, they have hopefully lots of other fun and active things, productive things to do, and friends and family members that they spend time with. So I'm not even going to attempt to play this video either, but it's a great example of a young man who, through his work, also developed a really strong hobby. And I won't tell you exactly what that is. I'll save it as a surprise, but it's a really great video about how work and hobbies can come together in just relationships with other people. So I'm going to put contact information up here. We didn't get Pam's. I apologize for that oversight. But if you go to the Transition Improvement Grant website, you can get Pam's contact information there. And we want to leave the rest of the time for questions from all of you. So we're going to check the chat area right here and just see if there are any questions. And I don't think there are. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like there are any questions at all, which I find very hard to believe. That's okay. So with that, I think I'd like to just thank Pam Jensen and Nancy Mulfenter for for presenting today on the webinar in regard to transition and the WIOA. This will be posted to our WSPEI webinar website. At the conclusion of today, we'll download the recording. We may do some editing and make sure there might be a way, maybe put another something together for the videos and making sure that those are all working and stuff like that. But all participants today, as well as those participants from the September 14th webinar, will receive an email from us when this recording is posted. All of the handouts for today, we're only allowed on the
GoToWebinar to upload 5 handouts, but we also have a Google folder that has additional handouts in it, and that will be sent out to all participants as well. So the other announcement is our next webinar will be on Wednesday, December 14th. WSPEI will be sponsoring a webinar on that day from 9 until noon, and our topic will be on mental health. So with that, I'm concluding today's webinar. Thanks everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of October.